Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got things popping up on my screen, so it's distracting me. All right, so call to order. The meeting is the call to order. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Okay, hearing none. I think we'll go to public comment at this point. Are there any public?
No public.
All right. All right, so we'll move on to approval of the previous meeting minutes. I'm going to have to get a motion and a second from Sarah and Joe, even though you may or may not have been at the meeting.
I was not at the meeting, but I see no flaws in them otherwise.
Yeah.
I'll approve the minutes.
So you're going to make a motion to approve.
Yeah.
And Joe, I'll take it you're going to second that.
Sure.
Okay.
So Mike, technically you can't second it because you're chair.
Right.
Okay.
That's how I interpret it. Anyway, I don't know if Christine interprets it differently or not, but
that's what we do at council too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And technically I can vote, but typically don't unless it's needed for a tie break.
Yeah.
So, and in this case, I'll vote because we need it for a quorum to get the requisite number of votes. So hearing no changes, all in favor of the motion, please say aye or signify aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Next, I think is election of officers. And I don't know if we want to do that tonight with the three of us or if we want to wait for the full group to be here. I don't know if anyone has any interest in taking over as chairperson, vice chair, or what's the other position? Secretary / treasurer?
I do have a question. I'm not sure if I missed it in the minutes, but has anyone come forward to fill the vacant seat created by Terry?
We did have, we did have one person that was interested in multiple commissions for the city. I believe there was 3 different commissions that they were interested in, one being the planning commission. Since we have, in my opinion, 6 strong members currently, the thought was to let one of the other commissions interview the person first, where they have a little bit less attendance or a little bit fewer members. So, but other than that person, I haven't had any indication of anybody coming forward at this point.
Okay, and there was somebody named by the name of Bauer who attended one of the previous meetings, so I think who had an interest in the commission. Was that the same person, or?
That wasn't David, was it?
Oh,
the first name.
It was not the same person that attended a previous meeting.
Okay.
The other thing I'll throw in is, I believe we had this conversation about trying to solicit some minority or folks who otherwise don't necessarily get involved. Did I say that politically correct? I don't know, but anyway.
And I had wondered that too, because I know we were going through the audit from the equity director, and I was wondering if maybe there was going to be some. I mean, I'm sure there will be some suggestions on how to incorporate more people into the commission.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
Maybe you're going to say the same thing. That's part of, I think she's working in like an overarching strategy around that. So I don't think there's going to be any like immediate results from that.
Yeah, it might be a kind of a slow brew kind of.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and I had an exchange with her about it as well. And she's really interested in making sure like we have good supports in place to bring in somebody who maybe is like not familiar with commissions, the structure at all to begin with.
So are they all really high learning curves? Because I feel like this one is a high learning curve.
Yeah, I think this is worse than others.
Yeah.
Worse. Higher learning curve.
Higher.
I thought, actually, I will say I was a little more intimidated. I had applied to a couple of commissions when I started, and the DRB still intimidates me just because of like the level of accountability that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like the knowledge of the code. I think that they have a lot on their shoulders. So my respect to them.
Yeah.
I
would agree with that.
Commission members.
So in terms of officers, I don't know if either of you are interested in any positions.
Not at this point, for me.
Have
You're
you
doing
heard
great, Mike.
Think about it.
by default? So Eric, have you heard from either from Amy, I guess would be the only other.
So I did reach out to Amy about her interest in continuing as vice chair, and she said she is not interested at this time. I guess she's got a lot going on right now, and she's still fine being a member, but is going to step down from being one of the officers.
Okay, so we really have 3 positions to fill. I'm okay staying on.
Is
No.
Amy's staying on though with the commission though, right?
That's correct. Yes.
good.
Yes.
So we need someone to step up for, well, any one of those positions, I guess, but we need nominations. So I'm going to suggest we table it until our next meeting.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll all be here and we can, all talk about it and make the motions.
I mean, I guess as an alternative option, Mike, if you're interested in remaining chair, we could take care of that position, presuming that no one else. I mean, I know if Amy doesn't want to be vice chair, she probably doesn't want to be the chair, and Tommy can't be an officer. So
Right.
Unless Abby, I'm gonna guess she doesn't have a strong interest, or we could revisit it when she joins and at least have the chair nominated so that we can do that.
Let's do that. That way there'll be at least 4 of us here.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So then I think the next item is getting into the form-based code, chapter 3, 4, whatever it is. I don't have it in front of me.
Parts 1 through 4.
1 through 4, chapter 3.
Right. So so I sent around a document that includes changes that we have discussed along the way. Basically, resent out sections 1 through 4 with those changes highlighted so we can talk about those specifically. And Abby also sent out an email earlier today with some comments from her so that she can have those comments at least acknowledged as we go through the documents. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Okay.
So that we can walk through I guess we don't need this anymore. So that we can walk through the comments, both what were shared by Abby and that I have incorporated and talk about them as we go. So, so I'll just scroll through the document here. Actually, sorry, let me rearrange my screen a little bit first. This is a challenge doing it with just one screen when I'm used to doing it with 2. So, okay. So the first few pages are just basically some reorganization of numbers and lettering from 1s and 2s. So nothing new here. I'll just cruise through this unless you all want to stop me to talk about any of it until we get to the substantive items to discuss specifically.
Eric, while you're doing that, I suggested to you that I might do something, and I haven't done it, of course. But I'm just wondering, because to me, this is a very complex and difficult document to understand, the form-based code.
Yep.
And I'm wondering about, I'll throw this out, how other folks might feel, but about having some kind of I was going to say simple, but I don't think it could be simple, but like a 1 or 2 pager that kind of just identifies the different building form sections and what's allowed, so kind of the different requirements of the zones, if that can be done simply. I know you shared with me a spreadsheet that you do for developers, a checklist type thing. I don't know if it's more or not, but I'm just trying to think, is there some way to simplify it so it's summarized in a couple of pages somewhere, as opposed to trying to get through all of this stuff?
Yeah.
I mean,
and I know that's good. That's probably a pain in the butt for you to have to try to do.
I can try to put something together, as much work as can be done up front so people understand what's going on. I think that it makes my job easier in the long run. So, you know, I don't think it would hurt to put together something like that. So I can try to get something together.
You're saying like kind of like a synopsis that would preface. Is that
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
understanding?
I kind of am having the same feeling, Mike. It's just, you know, we're tweaking things like, you know, ones are going to A's and twos are going to B's, but this sort of overview feeling, I'm still feeling like we might not be hitting it, sort of seeing it as an overview. I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, okay, well, you know, what are the restrictions or the parameters in each of these different districts? And it's hard, to me, it's hard to go through this document and pull that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we discover just in our conversations that, you know, we're going on and on about something, and then somebody says, well, what are we talking about? And it's, you know, 2 blocks or something, you know, that,
Yeah. Or it's in another, it's stated someplace else.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so the first comment here highlighted is a discussion we had about the notification to adjacent property owners. When we discussed this previously, I had some concerns about the 15-day notice and just being able to ensure that we're meeting our statutory requirements for taking action on an application, since these are still technically administrative applications. So the language I was proposing here is to basically indicate that the notice to the adjacent property owners will be mailed no less than 10 days prior to the meeting. This is one section where Abby provided a comment about whether or not this meets state statute. And I actually would say that it does, because technically the statutory reference that she's citing and just statute in general would apply to public hearings. And since these meetings are not public hearings, they wouldn't fall under the purview of open meeting law. It's really more of a staff meeting. And so it's more of a courtesy that we're inviting the adjacent property owners to these meetings and making them aware of the actions that are happening. So it's because the project review committee is not a standing committee of the city, it doesn't fall, the open meeting law standards don't apply to that group specifically.
And I remember when we talked about this, we had quite a long discussion about this in terms of should it be 15 days or 5 days, and we settled on 10, I think, my recollection.
That's where we landed with the intent to come back and revisit.
Yeah, I sort of thought about it too, and I was wondering if maybe we should meet in the middle, Eric. Because we went from 15 to 10, and it is still a notification to the public. I don't know if going to 12 is going to help you any in what you got to get figured out.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge becomes that statute requires that I take action, or the zoning administrator take action on a zoning permit application within 30 days of receipt.
Yep.
So that action can either be approval, denial, or referral to what they call the appropriate municipal panel, which in our case would be the Development Review Board. I have to take one of those actions within 30 days of receipt of a complete application. So because we have this project review committee for projects that are in the form-based code in the Gateway Zoning District, we have to specifically schedule a meeting and then notify the adjacent property owners per the regulations of the meeting. So to fit everything within that 30-day window, and that's 30 calendar days that we have to take action when I'm only here for 20 business days, technically, in any 30-day period, roughly, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah.
So I'm working with basically 20 days as it is from the time an application shows up here. So 10 days to me, I think, is a sufficient amount of time. And the reason I say that is because one of the standards in statute is that for projects that need to go through a site plan review, which are basically any projects in our code anyway, any project that is not a single family or 2-unit dwelling, for the most part. There's some other projects like that, but they're pretty small projects, don't go through site plan review. Just about anything else does. And site plan review does require formal notice to adjacent property owners. It does go to the development review board, and statute only requires 7 days notice for site plan review. So this is giving more time than site plan review, but not as much time as a formal public hearing. And
Okay.
I mean, I think in most cases, 10 days is I think a pretty good amount of time for people to get notified. So I mean, we could do more, but I think all that does is compresses the time that I have available to take action on these projects. So the risk that we would run into is that I have to take action before we could even have a project review committee meeting. So then the adjacent property owners don't know about it.
I guess it's just hard for us to judge.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Your logic sounds very well reasoned, Eric, and it sounds like you put a lot of thought into it, and I totally appreciate that. I can understand where Sarah's coming from too, is because I think it's sort of, I mean, the feeling is that the project review committee meeting is the only avenue that the public has for any sort of expression of their sentiment about a project, in which really they don't really have any real statements. And here you're getting even less time to, you know, kind of gather the wagons to put that together. So they have, I mean, the public kind of has limited participation in this to begin with, and then it's going to be, you're taking even more away. So I can kind of see that, but it sounds like you have good sound reason for doing it.
So
Well,
if
and I guess I would also say that, you know, because this is an administrative approval still, the property, even after action is taken, the property still gets posted for the 15-day appeal period. So during that additional 15-day appeal period, folks can, if they want to, they can learn more about the project. You know, we put all the information on our website, and we have it available here at City Hall as well. So that if people want to see more about it and learn more about it, they can. And they still have the right to appeal that decision, because it is an administrative decision to the Development Review Board.
Okay.
I'm going to add to, I think I said this when we were discussing it before, and I hear the time crunch. I know that was a big part of this, Eric, because you are only there 20 days. And by the time you get the application, get all the stuff together and whatever. The other thing is, when this first came up, there was no public notice, and we required, we being the council at the time, required them to put in some provision for public notice, so that the public would at least be able to know about it and get there and be able to give some input. Because originally it was going to be just basically a closed door hearing.
okay.
So any concerns with the language as it's written for the 10 days prior to the meeting? Hearing none, I'll say we're so far so good. And again, we will have to set a public hearing on all of these changes anyway, so there will be another opportunity to look at this.
Okay.
So the other comment, Abby had another comment on this under item D, basically asking about the if the project review committee has really any authority for approval or denial, or if it's basically just making a recommendation, and if there's any information about the project review committee itself. So to her comment, I would say the project review committee is advisory strictly. They provide input to me as the zoning administrator. Ultimately, this is still an administrative approval, so they have no authority to approve or deny. It still is ultimately the zoning administrator's decision. And to her second point about the makeup of the project review committee, I actually have put in a definition in the form-based code that defines who the project review committee is and what they do. So that's obviously not a section that we've looked at. So I think we've covered both of her concerns there.
That definition also talks about their, I'll use the term power, but they're advisory and not regulatory, or whatever the word is.
Yeah, correct. And actually, I think so.
I think personally, I have more of a fundamental objection with that system of governance with the project review committee versus how we've actually worded this, but.
So I don't know if you can see, did the screen switch for you all?
Yes.
So here's what I've drafted for the project review committee definition, if you want to see that. So that's, gives some sense of what their role is, who they are, how that all works out.
Joe, what was your last comment? Was it about the project review committee? I didn't catch the whole gist of what you
I
were
was
saying.
just saying that, like, I think that the addendums that have been presented here are valid and work. I think I have more of a problem with having a project review committee versus a design review board. Just in reading, like, actually some of the testimony that I've gotten out of, like, the Burlington Design Review Board, what they put forth as far as suggestions for projects that get real consideration, rather than you have a bunch of neighbors come out here who are talking about their concerns of a project, and they may or may not get recorded. So.
Yeah.
But Eric, does the RPC, did I say that right? It's really looking at technical aspects, right? I mean, it's public works, it's safety, it's community development.
Right, for the most part, that's what they're looking at.
Yeah.
The actual conformity with the code is under my purview still, and that's where anything specific to the form-based code would be identified and flagged as a condition or something that needed to be amended prior to. Technically, what we try to do is get all that addressed prior to the submission of the application, so that the consistency with the code has already been established prior to it even coming forward and being a formalized submission.
And Joe, I think that the discussion of a design review committee is something that we can take up at a later date as part of the looking at zoning as a whole. Just
Sure.
And Christine, I forget. I guess we would recommend, if we come to that conclusion, we would recommend starting a design review committee to the council. They would have to approve it and set it up, correct?
Yes. Well, I'm answering for you, but I actually asked Jessie right before she left, what would it take to put a committee together? And that was pretty much the answer. Yeah. So it could be individuals in the community, or it could be us, right? It doesn't matter where it comes from, but it has to go to council.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so moving along. No other real issues with that text. The next item that was flagged here was in this section, and actually Abby had a comment on part A here about the modifications. And her comment was an increase to, I'm guessing she meant to say in the size of the dwelling units and not the number, and if that would trigger the need to review the project. And I guess I hadn't really thought about the size of the units, because we don't have any specifications in the code now for the size, whether that be the number of bedrooms or the actual physical square footage of a dwelling unit. We look at the overall building footprint. So I don't know if changing the size of the units would have an impact as much as the number of units, quite frankly, but happy to hear others' thoughts about that.
I would think that if let's say you have a building with 20 units in it, and they're all 1-bedroom units, if you want to make a couple of them 2 bedrooms, you're probably going to decrease the number of units. And conversely, if you're trying to make 2-bedroom units to 1-bedroom units, you might increase the number. So I would think that would kick this in.
That's, I think, what I was envisioning as well, rather than just then yeah, I guess I don't know if there would be a change in the size of the dwellings without, well, it would be a change of the building, I think, if there's going to be any external factors at play aside from just rearranging what the footprint already looks like.
And we have in the code somewhere minimum size that like a bedroom could be, or living room, or et cetera, correct?
It's in the housing code. It does talk about the minimum size for a dwelling space or sleeping space. I forget how it's actually worded, but in the municipal ordinances, yes, we do discuss that.
So I guess my only comment would be to be sure that if there was a change, let's be crazy, someone wants to create a 3-bedroom unit out of a 1-bedroom unit, and they're making 6 by 7 foot bedrooms, which can just fit a bed in it, nothing else, then the municipal code housing again.
Well, I mean, I think that would be reviewed, quite frankly, that would probably be reviewed during the building permitting process.
Okay.
The zoning ordinance wouldn't get involved with that.
Okay.
Because
I
that's
guess
not a land use component, that's more of a habitability component and a building component.
All right.
So I
that
think
would be my only concern.
I think in this case, if they're increasing the size of a dwelling that is going to result in a change to the approved building footprint, I believe that would be captured under item B here, that it would be a change to the approved site plan, because the building footprint would be changing and therefore altering the site plan itself.
Yeah.
So I think if they're working within the existing footprint of the building and they're increasing the number of units, I don't know if that's really something that we would get into other than for site plan modifications, because it would, if they're increasing units, they're going to need more parking.
Well, increasing units would fall under A, right?
Oh yes, sorry. If they're increasing the size of the units, that's not gonna, and they're not changing the number of units, without changing the footprint of the building, I don't, unless it gets to the point where they need more parking because the bedroom count changes or increases by that size of the units, I don't see that as I don't know if it's going to be a factor, I guess is my point.
And so maybe to her point, if they decrease the number of units but don't change anything else to the building, then it doesn't get reviewed.
That's the way that I viewed it. Yeah, if it's a decrease in the number of units, because presumably it's going to have a smaller footprint or a smaller impact on the space. So if a larger site was approved, then presumably a smaller site would also be approved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
I think it's clear.
So, and then, so part C here was one that we had some discussion on, which is why it's highlighted. I don't know if there was any, I don't quite frankly remember what the discussion was on this part. So
Yeah. What are we in?
I don't know if there was anybody remembers or has any specific concerns with that.
205. 205. Well, it's not in my notes, so.
So maybe this wasn't an issue at all then.
Yep.
And we can continue on. Okay. Then we shall.
Was this the one that you were talking about in regards to like the wraparound of some buildings? I can't remember. I mean, it has been, like, I haven't been to the last meeting, so I didn't know if that was picked up again. But do you remember you were talking about that, Eric, about increasing kind of the like glazed portion of a building?
Oh, are you referring to the like windows on the sides of the building?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So this wouldn't have, this wasn't related to that discussion.
Okay.
So, okay, well, I guess we'll move on. So again, these were all pretty standard, I think. No real concerns with any of this. previously, and I apologize for the scrolling if this is hard to see on the screen as it goes by.
If I fall over because I get dizzy, you'll know why.
So the next item we had discussion on was the administrative amendments for the parking setback line. And I added this language about corner lots to just be able to accommodate the secondary side, the secondary street, to allow for more relief on that side to accommodate the parking, just given some of the area that was available. And this is actually one that Abby had a comment on as well. And her comment was if we wanted to add any buffering, such as bushes or walls, et cetera, to the border, to the neighbors, if the parking is moved closer to their properties on the side streets. And I think in this case, I don't think that the parking would actually be moved any closer to the neighboring properties by having it would actually be moved closer to the street is what this would allow. This wouldn't impact any of the existing areas on the property or the adjacent properties. It would just allow parking to be closer to the street.
But the neighborhood manners takes care of that buffering anyway.
Correct. That's correct. Yes. Yes. And parking is already permitted in the neighborhood manners areas already. So it may allow for some additional encroachment there, but it's still requiring at least 15 feet, that the parking setback would be no closer than 15 feet behind the property boundary. So there's still a fairly, I think a good setback on that secondary street anyway. But I know we did have some discussion on this, so I wanted to make sure we were able to revisit it if there was more to have.
Everyone okay with that? I know we had a long discussion and it's not crystal clear in my head, but that's okay because I know we had a long discussion.
Yes.
I thought, yeah, Abby really had a clear mind for this, and I have a hard time conceptualizing it myself. So.
Yep. So do we need to read Abby's comment again, or do you guys feel comfortable moving on?
I'm comfortable moving on.
Okay.
I think Eric addressed it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. All right. So moving on then, I think the next big item was the common drives and the curb cuts. So unless there's something else in here, I'm just going to cruise through these sections fairly quick. Actually, no, I had a note on something that there was a couple of items, a couple of changes that I made that I didn't intend to make. So I wanted to just make sure that those were identified, but I think they come in later. So.
Actually, would you stop on page 13, the one
Sure.
you just went?
Yep.
Okay, going to D, which is the historic structure one.
Yep.
So this means that a building couldn't. Did we talk about this already? Historically, designated structure may be specified for civic use buildings, but that means somebody couldn't take a building and turn it into a restaurant or a shop or something else. Is that what that is limiting?
I think
this.
what this is saying is that a historic structure could be designated as a civic building on the regulating plan, which then gives it some protections, but also limits some of what can happen there. But it's not suggesting that it has to be a civic building that this historic structures have to be designated as civic.
Okay, can we put that in there? That it
already is by the wording, just by saying that historically designated structures may be specified by planning commission and city council. So it would in essence have to be a change to the regulating plan, which requires you all first as the planning commission to propose the change or to make the change, and then go through a public hearing, and then for council to approve that change as well as an amendment to the regulations. So it's not, it wouldn't be as simple as somebody just saying, you know what, I think we should make that a civic building. and it just becomes that way. It has to go through this whole process like we're doing now for any of these other amendments for that to happen.
So it doesn't limit it to civic use.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I was saying.
I think there's only 3 buildings that are currently designated as civic use. One is City Hall, one is the fire station, and one is the school.
Okay.
So other than that, everything else is based off their regulating plans.
What
So
is
they can be designated as civic, but they don't have to be.
okay? So can you relay what the intent of this is?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the intent here, and I don't have my code with me, but there is actually, let me see if I can get to it quickly. So
I'm kind of wondering, is it like the idea that if a historic property became available that was in an outlying like zoning district, that it could be used for a civic purpose?
I think really what it has to do with is what requirements civic buildings need to go through.
Okay.
So this is the existing code for what we say for civic. Something that is specifically designated as civic does not need to comply with the architectural standards or the building form standards. I think what that's doing is basically saying if it's a historic structure that we want to protect or allow to maintain its existing architecture and form, it can be designated as a civic use. And then when it redevelops, or if it redevelops with other uses that are allowed in that building form standard, it wouldn't need to go through the architectural standard review or the building form standard review.
Okay, that makes perfect sense now that you're.
That is what I think that is intended for.
Okay.
Okay, so like, yeah, so it wouldn't be judged against the same yardstick as a new build, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And the mayor has her hand up.
Okay, so just to be clear, this existing language allows an historic structure to disregard the building form standards. It does not, it's designated civic, but it does not require a civic use.
So this applies to any uses that are designated as civic now, or they would have to be designated as a civic use on the regulating plan.
So as an example, the Stone House on East Allen Street is privately commercially used.
Correct.
Could we, under this language, designate it as civic, and then it doesn't have to conform to building form standards, even though it's not actually in reality being used in a civic way?
It would be able to.
Wouldn't it have to become a civic use? Isn't that the intent?
I don't think so. There are specific, the code allows for certain uses to only be permitted in the civic use category. But I think they ultimately still need to follow the building form standard where they're located. So for example, with the school, when it redeveloped, or with the project they're going through now, granted it's a school, so it's a little bit of an odd example. They can continue to utilize, they were basically able to design whatever type of a school they wanted because they didn't need to comply with the architectural standards or the building form standards, which talks about location to the building line, the parking setback line, things of that nature. So they were able to design something that really fit that civic nature of the designation. I would have to look at the code specifically to see what is all permitted under that category of civic.
So the school was considered historic structure then? And that's why they were allowed to?
No, it was just designated as a civic use.
Okay.
So
in the case, in the language that you pointed out, Sarah, allows for historic structures to be classified as civic to allow for this provision that's on the screen now to take effect.
But I read this provision as saying it's a civic use in a building that houses a civic use on a civic site. So if it's a private law office, let's take the Stone Store, right? A private office, that's not a civic use. So I don't see how this would apply. But I think it gets into the question back to the historic structures of looking at that a little bit more closely when we get the input from the consultant and dealing with historic structures that we want to maintain.
So here's how we define civic use currently in the code.
Places of worship, museums, auditoriums.
Well, so, and I guess what came to mind is actually, in fact, the mayor's specific reference is like when the city acquired the city did own the old stone house for quite a long time. They bought it after the bicentennial and adapted it from use as a private dwelling to, I think it was offices on the first floor, and then it was a public museum on the second floor. But being a historic structure, it would destroy the building to renovate that to modern building standards. So I guess that's why I think that, am I understanding this correctly? It's saying that these other standards wouldn't necessarily inherently apply to a historic structure being used for a civic purpose?
If it's officially designated as a civic use on the regulating plan.
Okay.
And the stone house is not.
It is not.
Right.
There's the only buildings that are currently designated as a civic use are the school, city hall, and the fire station.
Sure. It probably would have been at one time though, I would think, because the city did own it, right? It was a public building.
And it had a museum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't, I mean, like the O'Brien Center is not designated as a civic use, for example.
Really?
So what about the mill, which has 2 museums in it? Does that then fall under this category?
No. It's not in the gateway, so it's.
Oh, it's not in the gateway.
Eric, is there more to that definition on the next page?
Yes,
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah, so there you go. Public ownership alone does not constitute civic use.
I had a question.
But
Can we scroll back up for a second? Sorry.
That's all right.
It was about like the act of God section where it was talking about, scroll up a little bit more.
In the definitions, or are you back to the?
Not in definitions, sorry. Where we were looking at about civic use for designated historic buildings. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does public enemy mean?
I think that means if somebody comes in and like actively or specifically tries to harm a building or a structure or does something maliciously.
Okay, it's like an act of vandalism.
Like a terrorist. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, I didn't know if that was defined somewhere, or, I mean, there probably is some formal definition of that, but.
So this conversation has again brought up the idea of historic structures and historic preservation, and I know we're waiting for the consultant's report, but it seems like, and I think it's something we can talk about later and make a change when we discuss the historic structures. But again, in terms of some of the structures in the gateway districts that are historic, that may be designated historic, because just because it's designated historic, as we found out with the mansion house, it doesn't protect it from being ripped down and whatnot. And I may be going a little bit on a tangent here, but I guess this just prompted me to think about, we have to deal with historic structures, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of pulled it out of this, because you know, we're scrolling through and tweaking a lot of things, and I just wanted to pull it out for the same reason, just to keep us on having that on the forefront some.
Any
that-
idea, Eric or Christine, when we're going to hear from Britta or whoever the consultant is?
So we did, right? She prepared the report, she prepared recommendations. At the strategy priority session the other weekend, we left historic preservation in the recommended section, not must do, but recommended. And we had some discussion about this body looking into in the coming year. Are there changes we could make in our existing regulations in the, like, more rapidly to have some local protections? Because there's more, we would need more research, potentially more work from a consultant to actually implement all of those recommendations she put forth.
Hmm.
So like, is there something short-term we can do in our form-based code and zoning that we can do more quickly than actually implementing all of what she recommended?
So
Yeah, because she put forward the recommendations, but then like actually putting that into action is a much larger process from what I
Yeah.
gathered.
Yeah.
have we,
Yeah,
I don't remember seeing that. Have we seen that?
Yeah, she talked, Britta talked to us, right? She presented to us.
She did. I
And-
think she spoke to council a little bit more about what the options were, though, as far
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
avenues
oh, yeah.
to take.
Yeah, about recommendations.
And so that the work we did on the Saturday session, staff is going to bring back to us after a final review, I think at our next meeting in July, to finalize. And then in August, like Eric, Mike, and myself, we will meet to talk about what the work plan would be for the commission, for this commission for the upcoming year. And then I think we can discuss where that fits in.
Okay.
Okay, so we can move on then, I guess, from this, if everybody.
Yeah,
But
I-
I'm glad you flagged this, Sarah. I've taken some notes because I feel like this ties right into like, is there somewhere that we could build
Yeah.
off of?
Yeah.
and I think part of
That's-
the problem, part of the issue is that the quick fix approach was already tried with form-based code, and it was found that didn't work and then got removed. And so we were left with nothing. And so now we're kind of going back to trying to do the quick fix, which it seems like we're kind of bouncing back and forth, and it might not lead anywhere to what we actually want, but
So we have to keep the pressure on, Joe.
I guess so. I mean, I would love to say that, you know, there was some piece of language we could include here that would actually have like a meaningful difference, but I think it really is going to be something broader, and it's a complicated issue, as Britta brought up. But
And I scrolled down, I see Abby has joined us. Hi, Abby.
Okay, so moving along. The next section where there's some significant, or where we had some changes and a lot of discussion, was with the common drives and curb cuts. So I'll first flag, we did have some discussion in under this part 1 here about the newer relocated curb cuts being within 100 feet of one another, or a certain distance on the same block face. So I added this additional language of the 50 feet of a block corner as well, so that we don't have them stacked right at the corners as well, in that regard. And I think, Abby, your comment comes in under common drives. So I think everything else was pretty similar here to what we had previously discussed. But then
Yeah, I thought the 50 feet from the black corner was a good addition. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the common drives is where I put in a lot of new language and just kind of rearranged things a bunch as well. So what I tried to do here was, based on our last discussion, set it up so that there were some kind of hierarchical aspects to this, so that we one of the comments, or one of the lines of discussion we had last time, revolved around using these common drives as kind of cut-throughs behind the back of these properties to avoid like going onto Main Street. So what I tried to do was build in some language that would help address that. I don't know if it hit the mark, but to try to get to some of those questions or concerns. And I know, Abby, you had a comment here about actually in this part A on the common drives.
Yeah, I was trying to get at like part of what the common drives is supposed to do is like de-suburbanized development, right? So it's supposed to provide more access points into different areas instead of like the traditional like main road into the parking lot and then back out onto the main road, to make it more like urban feel, like give greater points of access. So I just thought it was worth discussing a little bit more if we really think these are going to be big cut through streets. I mean, they're going to be like parking lot type facilities. I just worry that we're like trying to avoid them being cut throughs, but they wouldn't actually be used as a cut through, bar some major accident happening on the main road, then maybe, but like designing them over an assumption that they'll be used as a cut through, I think might be unfortunate to what the goal of the common drives really was, which was providing like less curb cuts, more access into the properties.
And so Eric, I asked you for just some images of that earlier today, which you sent to me. And can you bring that up first? Because the page 12.
That is a good question. I don't know if I have that readily accessible for myself.
Okay. All right. Well, that's okay. But so they're kind of, some of them, they were common drive, but they didn't go through. They were sort of,
Correct.
They looped around the sides of the building.
Correct. And I think the idea here is that the common drive there would be access onto the main road as well that went into the common drive, just based on the curb cut locations. It may not be that every property has a curb cut, which is kind of what I was trying to get at by adding this language here, to basically say common drives are going to serve the property. So there might not be a curb cut available on the property when it redevelops based on the location of other curb cuts. But those other curb cuts would also provide access into the property, so that it's not just going to be a common drive along the back of all the properties that's only accessed off the side streets. There would still be the mid-block curb cuts that access the parking areas and therefore the common drives, but that may not be on every property.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, this might be too subjective, but is there some way to incorporate language in there that would say like, and this would be to like the planner's discretion, but if it's foreseen that this common drive would in fact create a situation where you can tell that it would be redirecting traffic, that the planner could suggest like a one-way situation or something like that it could be at their discretion to provide mitigation to adverse effects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's possible to do it that way. I mean, I think I would prefer to have something more specific included in the regulations that.
So what if it, so if you had a block where you were going to have common drive that went out on both sides of the side streets, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What if you didn't allow that? What if that common drive had to have a cut in the middle that didn't allow, so you would have two smaller common drives? See what I mean?
Well, so that I think was partially the language on the next page talking about the one-way traffic or the two-way situation and how wide of a block could accommodate that, so that there would be some of those items incorporated. I don't know if I hit the mark with that, but that was kind of the intent of what I was doing, was trying to, if it was an excessively long stretch of block, that there would be some limitations or some alternatives that were incorporated.
So it wouldn't be just a whole street behind all those houses.
Correct. It would need to have some sort of a chicane or a speed table or something that would kind of divert traffic or reroute it or slow it down a bit. It would still be able to continue the whole way through, but it wouldn't just be a straight shot with no stop signs or no brakes, so that people would use it more as a cut through.
Yeah,
What-
yeah, I saw that language in D, which I thought was helpful. You have like if it's two-way traffic, you need limit traffic speeds with speed tables, speed dips, or similar methods. You know, you can't have more than 400 feet without a stop device to control traffic. I think those speak to, you know, discouraging it as a cut through, but we know the more access points we give into a property, and I'm like not advocating for curb cuts, but just talking about like off the main road and the side roads, it spreads out that traffic. Where if you end up doing like a one-way situation, like you're forcing traffic to constantly move into the neighborhood. You don't give that disbursement through different access points.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, ultimately, you know, if we look at the language on curb cuts and how often they're permitted, you know, you can have a curb cut basically every 100 feet in essence. And so on a block of 400 feet, you're presumably going to have 4 curb cuts or have the ability to put in roughly 4 curb cuts on the main road, plus then a common drive access on the back. So you're going to have multiple points of ingress and egress. And I think I did some measurements, and the block between, I want to say the block between Platt Street and, was it La Fountain or no, Spring Street?
Spring Street. Yeah.
I think that block is like 360 feet long. So something on that scale. So there's not going to be the potential for a whole lot of development on a block like that, but there will be enough that they could have multiple curb cuts on the main street and still have the ability to provide some sort of access off the back through that common drive.
Do you know what the distance between Spring and La Fountain is? Did
I
you
want
measure?
to say it's around
Sure
the
that-
same. I can measure it quick here, I think.
It seems like that would be probably the longest.
So I wonder,
Well, there's some others that are longer, Mike, but yes, that's pretty long.
Well, on the other side of the street, I guess, from Stevens up to Tigan is a long haul.
Yeah, that's a gap.
And
That's
if they-
probably the longest.
But
if the
there
neigh-
is a provision for some like sanctioned cut through there, I guess. We discussed before that, Eric.
Right. Yeah, opposite Bellevue.
I mean, I want to sort of throw out the idea of, could we just not allow it if it was, so it either has to be an L-shaped or a U-shaped, and it can't be just one straight line all the way through the back of the block? I mean,
Just don't know, like if you actually look at what we're talking about, I don't really see it impacting neighbors, especially if the neighborhood manor it exists in its full capacity. So basically you have properties along these main streets. So we're talking about going behind the property along the main street. So it's not like going down into a neighborhood and then cutting through the middle. It's really going around one of these properties and cutting into the back. So the neighbors that would be affected if it was used by the cut through, if the neighborhood manor would properly insulated the neighbors from the development, I don't see like the big impact on that particular neighborhood.
well, if you're coming on the side street, let's say you're going towards Main Street, right? And there's a common drive and you take a left heading south, you could go all the way through that if it went from that block to the next one. Do we want to allow that? Do you see? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
yeah, okay. So you're saying like if you come like and you cut through the neighborhood basically, and then you use that to continue
Instead of
staying
going
off the main roads.
Yeah.
So that's where that chicane design and the speed tables and stuff. Joe, what were you gonna say?
Eric added all this interesting stuff, which I think puts my mind at a lot more ease about it. But I was going to say, like, this does happen already. Like, I see it all the time. How many people who are coming down, East Spring, to like go towards Upper Main and just cut through LeClaire onto La Fountain and then kind of hopscotch up there. And I think we're kind of all envisioning, which adds a lot of traffic to those very nice residential streets that otherwise wouldn't be there. And a lot of people honestly speeding through there just to get wherever they're going because they have no real association with that neighborhood. But I think all of this mitigation is really good because I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I think this is in a way already in place. Like if you kind of picture, is it, I'm trying to think of the name of the street, Newell Place and like Weaver Lane behind the Winooski block.
Yep.
I mean, that's a public street,
Yeah,
but that in
it's-
effect serves as this function. And I think it's one way. And I think it actually functions pretty well. It doesn't, invite people to cut through there, but it still provides, good egress for all the businesses that are located in the Winooski
Yeah.
block and allows
But
them.
Great shot. You can't go all the way through it. You have to make an L.
Yep, exactly. And I think it's one way in certain directions. I can't remember exactly.
Isn't it one way to West Allen Street by the bank?
I think so.
And I think it's two way from Main Street over to,
To the behind there, yeah.
behind there.
That's actually a really interesting point, Joe. We already kind of have a system of these side roads in place when you think about the corridors. So, for example, Weaver Street, in essence, serves as a side road to Main Street. LeClaire up to LaFountain, over to, I guess, to Upper LeClaire, to Berlin, up to Bellevue, gets you on that side of Main Street. So there's already a series of connecting side roads.
Mhm.
So it may be that these common drives would not be considered for that type of cut through traffic because there's already a public road that they can use to cut through on if they really need to cut through.
That's true.
Well, and people are going to cut through if it saves them time. So if you put some restrictions on it, and if they're dumping out into a street that's busy, like East Spring Street, it's going to discourage them if they can go faster up Main Street or go wherever.
And that was part of like, there was discussion of like, was it Mansion Street when there was a proposal to make it one way at a certain point? I don't remember the exact details, but I definitely, like when I'm walking around the city, I watch people like rip through those neighborhoods, like just trying to get to like East Allen or vice versa, like trying to get from East Allen up Barlow to Maine. And it has a real effect on those people.
And really, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing, if there's a real concern about cut through, even with what Eric has put in here, another way around it, people might not like it, but you make only exits onto the side streets. They can't access from the side streets. So they can't turn from, let's say, LaFountain Street into one of these alleyways and get off on Spring Street.
I'm having a hard time with equating city streets with what we're talking about with common drives. Like a successful city is this grid-like structure, right? Which encourages traffic to go in many different directions. It's like a deconcentration of traffic, right? Versus like a cul-de-sac suburbia where everybody's forced to be on the main road because nothing gets anywhere else. So to say that people are cutting through city streets to get places, I mean, I think that's the essential function of the roads versus like a common drive, which I'm envisioning to be much narrower, like less accessible space that's clearly going through like a parking lot with speed bumps. It just feels very different to me than equating it to like a city street.
Well, that's why if the concern is that people are going to use it that way, and people will use whatever they can if it's going to gain them a minute in travel time, right? So whether it's a city street or an alley or a
right, but I
common
don't
drive,
think as designed these are going to gain them any time unless, like I said, there's a major accident, and then it gives circulation, which I don't think is like a terrible thing.
Yeah,
and I think we're on the same. That's what I was trying to say, Abby. I think we're on the same page.
I think we all agree.
I think so. Yes.
The other thing to keep in mind, there's going to be some areas of the city where just based on the grades or other physical attributes, common drives won't be able to connect the whole way through from one side street to another. So these, in essence, will only serve a certain amount of space as they get developed, just because there won't be an opportunity for them to go anywhere else.
And I think we discussed the possibility they honestly may never materialize, but like it's here in case, there's an opportunity for it.
That's correct. Yeah, I think once more development starts to happen and we start to to see developments come in where they can't get a curb cut, they're going to have to take access from a shared curb cut and then some level of common drive on the rear parking areas.
That's an interesting phrase you just said. Once more development starts to happen. Are we envisioning like it faster? Because like I feel like it's happening pretty fast already.
No.
Okay.
I think the market's going to dictate that.
Okay.
So
I think it's as things fill in.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really the term.
so since we're speaking about this, Eric, is the 400 feet too long because of the size of our city blocks that you've written here, or you sort of paced that out, thought that through, I assume?
So I mean, to the extent that I looked at a couple of samples, I mean, we don't really have that many blocks, quite frankly. Most of them are much longer than 400 feet.
Okay.
There's only a handful that are less than 400 feet, where, they're like, for example, as Mike mentioned, the block between, we have one block that goes on the west side of Main Street from Stevens Street up to Teigen. That's an entire block, which is almost a quarter mile of block, which is really a long way.
Yeah.
So for the most part, 400 feet is I think long enough to capture more of the what I would call the more residential blocks, like the Mansion to Platt and the Platt to East Spring type of situations. But beyond that, like when you go from East Spring to La Fountain, then you're getting into, that's about a 750-foot stretch. On the other side of the street, like the Union to Stevens is a pretty significant stretch. So there's, that 400 will limit, or I think will accommodate the more residential areas to kind of force that flow of traffic from going into those areas and taking it away from those areas.
And would any of this stop a developer who says, I've got 350 feet, I want to put speed bumps up or some kind of slowdown? I mean, could they choose to do that themselves?
Absolutely.
So
Yep,
they may
absolutely.
do that. They may do that because
Absolutely. They could do whatever traffic control they wanted to.
if children in the back and it's paying or whatever.
Yep, absolutely. So this, just to point out, this is one section where I did notice that I neglected to put in the word apply here on the end of this, so that the standards under part 301 D3G apply. So that'll be an addition for the next version that you see.
Maybe another example of this. I don't know if any of you folks are familiar with this, but I think it's in Essex Junction in South Street. There's an access point to, I think it's is it called Essex Pearl Street Place or Essex Junction Place? There's a large shopping mall there, and there's kind of a corridor that follows behind it, and it's a very popular spot because you can go from basically Park Street in Essex, hopscotch like back behind that shopping center, and then be most of it, like you've totally avoided Five Corners.
You're talking the old AMP Center?
Yeah,
Joe?
exactly that shopping center, and they have put in like traffic like easing, calming, I guess, efforts. There's speed bumps, and like they have like odometer, speedometer kind of thing set up there. You're trying to get you to go 15 miles per hour and really only encourage people who are using the businesses there to go through there.
So you yourself, have you used that before?
Of course he has. That's why he said it.
Not specifically to cut through, because I think they do have these things in place. I have used it when I'm using the businesses that are in that shopping center, but I could see where if it didn't have that, it's a prime target for just like zipping through there and like creating real public risk for like people who are using that space.
Yeah, Essex Junction does a good job of forcing you through the Five Corners. Like you can't, I've tried to get from Lincoln Street to Pearl Street. And without the five, it's impossible.
Yeah, there's a labyrinth kind of set up there.
That's why they're putting in the Crescent Connector.
Yeah.
So a lot of these buildings that we're putting up are residential buildings, and are there going to be back lots or these common drives that children might be playing in? Or, I mean, do we need to be stronger about the speed back there? I'm just throwing that out as a,
That's nothing, I don't think that's anything we would dictate in zoning. And it's going to be private.
Right. That's what I was gonna say is it's
Okay.
gonna be private land. So the owners would be the ones that would have control over that. The city can't dictate what the speeds will be on these in these drives and whatnot. So
but it can dictate how many speed bumps or what do you call it? Slowing down methods, speed tables.
I don't know if it can regulate how many. It can say you got to
Just-
put it like Eric put in, if it's over 400 feet,
Yeah,
you need to
yeah.
put in some kind of traffic calming, but is that one speed table? Is it 5?
Right. I'm just throwing it out there because if it is residential and we have children who like to be in their back space, is there anything we can do to
Well,
make sure?
I think the market's going to dictate that, the folks living there.
Oh,
hopefully,
there won't be. There won't
hopefully
be
the
children.
private open area will be closer. Well, the private open area can't extend past the common drive, so there shouldn't really be any reason for folks to be playing back there unless they just want to play in the street. In a
That's
parking
my
lot. So, I mean, that's possible, I guess, but
We
Yeah.
always played in the street when I was a kid, touch football, wiffle ball, whatever.
We just need to get them to start building units with more than one bedroom so we can have some.
Yeah, I was gonna
families
say that
in
too.
the street. Yeah, but isn't there
Okay.
some regulation like private property can't post legal speed limits, right? They're like required, if they post, they're more advisory and they have to be like under 15.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there is something about how that's actually regulated, but I don't know the specifics.
Yeah, so Sarah, I don't think they're allowed to post 25, 30. They're not allowed to go like up that high. I think they can use like red signs or like a different color sign that's advisory. That's like a below 25.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would not be enforceable by police.
Yeah. I think part of it is too, is the situation that I was describing, as far as behind the A&P shopping center. I don't remember the exact name for that complex.
Post Office Square.
Post Office Square. Yeah, there's way too much parking back there. Like as far as what's needed, I can understand if there was housing above the storefronts that were there. But it's like way overabundant parking, and so it basically makes everything like it could be a speedway if there wasn't anything to ease that. So it's something I think that these common drives being, if they're wide enough that they're serviceable for access for public services if need be, but kind of compact enough that it's not going to kind of give you the opportunity to really abuse it.
Do we specify road width, like common drive width, and can we specify that in this?
So I've noted that the minimum is 20 feet. And that's to accommodate basically two-way traffic. And also typically at least from our fire department, they typically like to see 20 foot to get their apparatus in and be able to set them up if they need to.
Can we maximum that? To
Yeah.
kind
I
of,
think we could.
Yeah, makes
Help.
sense.
yeah, with the concern about them providing giant roads through the back of the development.
I think we could. I guess what I would say to that is I would be surprised if anybody any developers were looking to go wider than that, just because they're going to need that space for parking or for other utility. But I mean, we can put a maximum in there. Sure. I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, I think you're right. They would not want to waste more space on a kind of broad roadway.
Is there a downside of putting a maximum, I guess, just in case some unforeseeable reason a
Yeah,
developer comes in and wants a 40-foot common drive?
yeah. Because they're creating a street somehow that they're,
Marketing to their residents is
Yeah, exactly.
accessible. Yeah.
These all go through site plan review.
They do, to the extent that it's not a formal site plan review as is outlined in our regulations, but it does go through a review of the site plan through all the project review committee. So emergency services, public works, myself, we all look at the site itself and identify any concerns or issues with the site specifically.
So in that case, it probably wouldn't hurt. And I don't know if it's a specific width, what's 24 feet for two lane traffic? I mean, the most you want is two-way traffic, right?
Correct.
So I don't know if that's 24 feet or 30 feet, or if you just put in, not to exceed adequate width to accommodate two-way traffic. That's probably too vague, but so I don't know if there's some specific width that we could put in for two-way, you know what I mean?
Well, I think in our drive aisles for parking, I think the minimum width we identify also is 20 feet. But I mean, we could list a maximum width if you wanted to. We could do it as the common drive shall be no less than or no more than. And I would say it should be no less than 20 feet. And I would probably, I mean, I wouldn't go any more than 30, maybe limit it to 25. I think the more narrow it is, the slower traffic is going to go.
Yeah.
Right. And I think 24-foot wide roadway. I remember when we redid the traffic lights on Spring Street, the lane widths were 10 feet, I think, or 9.5, I think 10 or 10.5 feet. So I mean, I would think 25 certainly is the most it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I could write it in as a shall be no less than 20 and no more than 25, if that's what people are comfortable with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I think you should no more than 21.
I can do that too if you'd like.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it does slow. I mean, the more narrow it is, people psychologically, they're going to say this is a driveway, not a street. This is just,
Right.
again, trying to add to that. So
Yeah,
I think I go out and look at 20 feet.
and maybe talk to John Rauscher and see what the minimum is to allow two cars to pass, because we don't want a striped street.
No,
We just want enough width that two cars can pass. And if they have to slow down,
that's okay.
slow down.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's true. Because I think on non-state streets, you can go down as low as 9, like I've seen 9 feet. So if we can get away even with reducing the minimum, that would be ideal.
Well, again, I think keeping it at 20 is typically what the fire department likes to see for their apparatus. That's the minimum they like to see. And I believe that's the minimum that we have for drive aisles in parking lots. So it's just for consistency's sake.
Yeah, they ask for 20 feet, even when it's like on a low traffic, like where they could take up the whole street. They still ask for that. Okay.
And that way they can get their outriggers out and set wherever they want them, and they're not limited by space in any way.
I think I can maybe provide like a test here a little bit too. I know that I'm in and out from my line of work in a lot of like elder care facilities or senior living facilities. And there's like never any access point made for people moving in or moving out. And so like moving trucks never have anywhere to go. And inevitably the only open spot is like a fire lane. So just keep in mind, it's not just cars we're talking about. It's, there are going to be other service vehicles that would be using this too. Maybe like trash removal that would be back there, or other services to the building.
Yeah, and ideally that's kind of the intent here, is that your kind of back of house services would be served off of these common drives, so they can avoid the main roads and again avoid those pedestrian conflicts with curb cuts and sidewalks and such. So okay, so moving through the rest of this, I think a lot of this, the rest of this page anyway is strike out, or because I've moved a lot of this stuff around into other areas. One item I wanted to point out on this next page is an item that I added, but I need to take back out. It's under item F here, where I say that properties not including a common drive. Hang on, I might not need to take this out. I need to check on this last sentence that said can only be utilized as private open area, because we don't permit private open area to be behind a common drive. So I realize this says the properties that are not including a common drive are required to incorporate the setback. But I just want to clarify that that is in fact the case, and make sure that I'm not creating an inconsistency with our regulations by having the second part of that sentence in there.
The way I read it was you're basically holding that space until somebody comes in and builds a common drive. Like that's the way that I was reading F. It's like if there's not a common drive, hopefully in the future there will be one. So this is like set aside for private or public.
Yeah, so that's why I need to check on the wording there to make sure again that I'm not creating an inconsistency. And so that if it is a common drive in the future, that it's not private open area, and so that those two aren't in conflict with one another.
Is the space you're talking about that's in the neighborhood manners, right?
It not necessarily, it may be, but the way that the building form standards are written is that if there's no common drive, then there is a setback that's required. But they also talk about if the required private open area cannot be beyond the common drive. So I just want to make sure that I'm not creating a situation where we're saying you can only use an area for private open area, but it's also potentially going to have a common drive in there. So,
But I guess my point is that the form-based code is just for, and I may be getting confused here with the downtown, but isn't it just lots that front on Main Street or East Allen or Mouse Bay Avenue?
yes.
And so at the rear of all of those lots is a neighborhood manor.
I don't think all of them have it. Most of them do, but not all.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so on E here, Abby had a comment about about whether or not we have the legal ability to require these common drives if we're not getting a right-of-way easement. And I think we do through our site planning process. I think we can require them to provide a note on the plan or some sort of designation that basically says this area will be a common drive or a connection to the adjacent property in the future. I've required that on several plans already, and the developers are more than happy to do it, so that there's at least the acknowledgement that a future connection will be made across their property. So I don't think we need a right-of-way easement or something in that regard to get these connections to be put in. And I don't know if, in speaking with the Public Works, I'm not sure we would want a right-of-way easement technically, because I don't know if we want to have any liability with these from the city's perspective.
Has the city lawyer looked at that language? Because I could see a developer agreeing to it in the front hand when like it's far down the road, but when it comes to the time of actually building them, is there any legal teeth to keep them from saying, okay, it was just a note on my plan, you know, I don't want you to do this, like don't move forward with that?
So I have not had our legal counsel review this, but I think in the context of the site plan, that is the approved document that carries the development. So if they deviate from that, then they have to amend that plan. So I think because the site plan is what gets approved, I think that gives us the legal backing to require it once it's on the plan.
To Abby's point, it probably wouldn't hurt though to have language in there saying requires the property owner to convey an easement to adjacent properties for use of it, or something like that. I mean, it's going to be, we don't want the city to do it, but we want to ensure. You may be right that the site plan dictates, but it wouldn't hurt, I wouldn't think, to have some language talking about requiring the property owner to convey easements to abutters for the common use or something like that.
Yep, I can check in on that and see if we do need to put something in or what we could put in to strengthen that.
And how does it work if I'm developing and I'm saying, okay, in the future, you can use the back of my property for this common drive. Two other developers come in, now there's an ability to make the connection. Who pays for it? Like, what's the who oversees that construction? If it's not the city easement, like who does that fall? Who does that cost and project management fall on?
So
I would guess the property owner.
what we would most likely do is make that a condition of approval based on the regulations that a common drive is required, that there is an easement or there's at least an access point identified on the adjacent property so that the developer of the new property would be required to make that connection.
So the developer of the new property would pay for their property and the adjacent property's connection to that road? Like they would incur the full cost of that common drive?
Well, so for example, the property on Main Street that's either, I believe, just finished construction at 211, they have a note on their plan for the property to the south that there's a connection point identified if and when it develops, because I believe they will also, the properties to the south would also need to use the curb cut that's there. So they wouldn't have access off of Main Street for their property. So they would need that common drive, thereby the condition of a condition of approval would in essence be that they need to make that connection to the 211 property in order to have access to their property for vehicles to use that curb cut.
And I think the answer to Abby's question is that each property owner is required to build what's necessary to connect into the next property. So you're responsible for construction on your property. I think South Burlington did a lot of this, especially in the southeast quadrant. They had identified rights of ways and easements for city streets, but the developer had to build them up to their property line.
Yeah, so if that's the case, this language needs to be changed because it's basically saying if you can, it says if a common drive does not exist and it's not feasible to construct, just set aside part of your property for some future time where we will need to construct a common drive. Right? It doesn't say like you build your portion now and then when other developments go up, they'll build their portion.
So, yeah, well, interesting. Because you probably don't have to build it today if no one's doing it, but when they put it in, you have to then construct it.
Yeah.
Let me look at that language again, Abby. That's a really good point. Let me look at that to strengthen or to make sure that it's clear what we're intending happens there.
Yeah, and like who the responsible parties are
right
for constructing that common drive.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, any other thoughts or comments on this section?
No, I'm just glad Abby read this so thoroughly.
Got a little freaked out I was going to be late.
Your comments are very much appreciated, Abby. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, moving along. Okay, so nothing new there. So we're into part 3 here, or the end of part 3, sorry, into part 4. And I believe, Abby, you had a comment here at the bottom on the facade composition, saying, are we discouraging Urban General from building ground story commercial because if they have to decrease their frontage by the 15 feet and whether or not that's a good idea, basically.
Yeah, so I just felt like this Urban General, they seem to be doing like the minimum commercial possible, and by adding them to A, it's basically saying your facade without commercial could be 75 feet, but since you're going to add commercial, we're making you reduce it to 60 feet. So I just wanted to point that out and make sure that we weren't discouraging what we want, which is more like ground floor, urban, commercial, retail type storefronts on the first floor.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess what I was what I was looking at when I added this language was more about the size of the retail space than and basically trying to create smaller spaces for these retail or these non-residential uses on the ground floor. So basically saying that if you're in the urban general, but building it as a storefront, then 60 foot is is the most you can go to kind of create that smaller space. But it's an interesting point. I guess I didn't think about that. It may be limiting as well because it's a smaller space.
Yeah. Why? That's my curiosity too, is why smaller? Because I do think that kind of dictates. I guess I'm a little bit thinking of the I think like the storefront in front of the City Lights building, which has been successful as like a tea shop and a bakery, but beyond that, I mean, it would be that's a really challenging space to work within for many businesses.
Well, so I guess, so just to be clear, what this is talking about is each, what we call the complete and discrete facade. So really how we're breaking up the building itself.
Yep.
So for example, if it's 150 foot wide building, if they're doing it just as residential, they would have 2 facades. But if they were doing it if it was in the urban storefront, then they'd have to have at least 3 facades.
Okay.
So they could combine those ground story units if they wanted to make one large space, but they would have to, the architecture of the building would need to be in kind of 3 distinct facade forms.
I get you. Yeah. So kind of like, for instance, like Misery Loves Company, how that's one business, but they do in fact occupy like 2 storefront spaces.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, but it is an interesting point that if we want to have these kind of wider facades, even if they are as commercial in the urban general, we could do that by just taking that language back out.
Yeah, like I totally understand the intention of breaking up facades, like, and it makes it feel like a little bit more interesting and varied, but there's definitely an additional cost to the developer to do that. And if they're already not super eager to do commercial, and then they see they have to break up the facade and incur that cost, I just think it might be counter to what we're trying to get at here. And they might want to do some like a grocery store, some commercial space that needs to be bigger, have a bigger frontage.
Wouldn't that be nice to get a grocery store?
There's nothing that would prohibit somebody in the urban general from doing a facade smaller than 75 feet.
Right.
So I guess, would you be comfortable then if I moved that language under item B? So that it's basically clarifying that even urban general with ground story commercial can build to the 75 feet.
As long as urban storefront is defined well,
it is.
Yeah.
Then I don't think you need to add it to the next one, because it says for all other, anything that's not an urban storefront, which is defined well, falls under B. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. I can just eliminate that language then. Okay, good. All right.
Eric, I don't have my clock up on the computer. Are we okay on time?
Well, it depends on what you mean by okay.
Well, what time is it?
Right?
It's about 10 minutes after 8.
Oh, I thought it was getting late. So I'm sorry, because like I said, my clock for some reason isn't up on my machine. So I lost track. Is everyone okay continuing on, or would people like to stop? What are you thinking in terms of time? We're pretty well through.
Well,
I mean, the changes.
To get through the rest of the regulations, you mean, or the rest?
Yeah,
of there's a few more sections that'll definitely need some discussion. So I think it's probably better if we
stop,
because we still have a couple items on the agenda, and we were going to revisit the officer positions.
Okay.
Now that Abby's joined us.
Sorry again for being late.
No, that's okay. All right. Is everyone okay if is this a good place to stop, or do you want to finish something up?
I think, let me just look here quick. I think this is probably an okay place to stop. I don't think I don't think this is any better than or worse than another spot. So,
Okay.
Page 20.
Page 20.
right.
Yep.
To add to what you just said, Abby, I would rather have you late than not at all, because you do enrich this conversation so much.
Very kind of you to say. I fear that I put too much out there, but
No,
Yeah,
you
I appreciate when you all put your ideas out there too. So.
I really like your way of looking at things. So
Yeah, we all have different strengths and weaknesses.
And that's what makes this a successful or a failure, if we all are able to put out our ideas.
Yeah.
And believe me, I put out some crazy ideas in the past. So if we're done with this, we're going to, Abby, we started talking about the officer positions, but we decided to table it until you came because there's only 3 of us.
Okay.
Didn't know if you have any interest in any of the positions.
What are they again? Like chair, backup chair, and like secretary?
Chair, vice chair, and secretary.
Okay.
And
Has anybody expressed interest in any of the above?
no one has expressed an interest. Terry was the secretary. Amy was the vice chair, but she has expressed that she is not interested anymore. Is that correct, Eric?
She's got a lot going on, and is just at this time is not interested in continuing as the vice chair, just in case the need arises for her to step up to that role.
And I will continue to hold the chairmanship for someone else until someone else is ready to take it over.
very
Thank you,
noble
Mike.
of you.
We'll accept
Yeah.
that.
Very noble of you, Mike.
That's how it
yes.
started. I said, okay, I'll be chair for a year until I think it was Paris or Dallas. Paris or Dallas? What was her name?
Palace.
Palace.
Alice, you were
Close.
close, you're halfway.
And then Palace moved on. So whatever.
So Abby, what we had talked about was potentially at this point, electing the chair and holding off on the other positions until the rest of the board was here. But at this point, it would really only be Amy and Tommy, who is not eligible for any officer positions as an alternate. And I made the comment that if Amy was not interested in the vice chair, then she most likely would not also be interested in the secretary spot either. So it's kind of down to you 4.
But she's not here. So
We can't pressure her.
And quite frankly, the secretary basically,
you do the job.
the secretary doesn't really do much at all. So,
Yeah, why doesn't the secretary take the notes? What happened with that?
so Terry was, as the secretary, when we were meeting in person, she would take the minutes. But since we've been meeting remotely, it's just easier for me to do them. And then,
How are you able to do them and conduct the meeting? Do you just like remember it after the fact and write it down, or?
pretty much,
Yeah. Wow.
yep.
I mean, it's recorded. He has-
Recorded.
Well, I do record it if I need to go back, but for the most part, I try to do them first thing Friday morning, so I remember what the conversation was about, and I'm able to get there pretty quick. So, and then I just make things up.
Yeah, I will say I would be I think I've said this before, I'd be very reluctant myself to accept serving as secretary, because I serve as secretary for at least 2 other organizations. And it just feels like I think I say this, oftentimes there are weeks where this planning commission meeting will fall on like a week full of meetings.
Yeah.
And it might be the same for you guys as well, but I just wouldn't. I mean, it's nice that Eric said that, you know, he's doing the work of secretary now, but I just am reluctant to accept that title if it does mean I have to take minutes for another organization, because it's a lot to juggle.
I mean, I'm fine continuing to take notes for the meetings. I serve as the secretary for the DRB. Well, I'm not the secretary, but I do the same role for the DRB meetings as well. So it's just as easy for me to do them as it is for somebody else. So
So do you need somebody to serve in that title? Is that what it is? Like,
We probably should. There's 3 officer positions that we should technically have filled.
Right. And at least in like the case of the Development Review Board, the secretary is who is designated to receive any appeals of either my decision or somebody else, if an appeal comes in. So really that role is just basically, it comes to me and I forward it on to the secretary and say, hey, this came in, just, you need to acknowledge receipt of it, and they do. So it's really, there's nothing for them to do with it. It's more just to know that it was sent to them.
Okay.
So it's they're all fairly easy roles to fulfill, I think.
Yeah, so I'm happy to table this to the next meeting, or like offer up, if nobody wants the vice chair, because Mike always attends the meetings. I would offer that up.
So do I take it none of you want the chair position? And if that's the case, technically someone should nominate me in second and we'll vote on it.
I nominate Mike for the chair position.
I'll second.
I would gladly accept if my pay doubles.
We can make that happen.
Okay, good. All right. If there are no other nominations, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Don't be so enthusiastic. Come on.
Yay, Mike.
And okay. Does anyone want to, Abby, I think did I hear you say you would take the
I would take the vice chair
chair position?
Sarah and Joe and Amy, and I guess Tommy's not eligible if other folks aren't interested in it.
So if Sarah or Joe are not interested, we know Amy's not. She's already said that. If you want to nominate Abby, we can vote on that.
Yeah, Sarah and Joe, would either of you be interested in this position?
Not right now, Abby. I still feel like I'm kind of green at it all, frankly.
I do too, especially when I'm listening to Abby. So that's why I would nominate Abby if she was
Got promoted, I just got promoted, so.
That's right, Sarah.
All right. So Joe made the motion, and Sarah, I heard you second that.
I second that.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Abby, you're the vice chair.
Okay, I'm your backup on 2
Yeah, on
boards now.
RPC too. Yeah.
That's right.
Oh yeah. And I'm no longer chair of that board, so maybe I can start missing some meetings.
Oh, wow.
Actually,
Well, let me know. Let me know if you do.
I'm going to be out of town on the next week for that meeting. If you can do it, you can take my place. Otherwise,
I'll be there.
All right.
Thanks
Good.
for giving me a reason.
Yes. And neither Joe nor Sarah wants to do the secretary position. Can we?
Yeah,
arm?
I would be really uncomfortable being secretary just in general as my skill set on that. Just the dyslexia, and it makes it really hard for me, that kind of position. So I probably won't ever want to be secretary, just going forward, or
Okay.
feel comfortable doing it. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And Joe, you already said you don't. So let's see if we can talk Amy into it at the next meeting.
I guess I would say the only other role for the secretary is if the chair and the vice chair are both absent from the meeting, they would be the next person in line to chair the meeting.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So that's all we'll deal with tonight then. And city updates, Eric or Christine?
So the only update I had while the mayor's off camera, real quick, is just I don't have anything specific other than to just note that, I sent around an article on parking standards from the city of Buffalo and kind of what they've experienced. So it's a bit of a long read, but I have not gotten through it all, but thought it has some interesting information included for an example. Maybe we can glean something out of that as we continue forward with our discussions. And to that point, Terry is still the Planning Commission representative on our parking inventory analysis and management plan. We don't have another meeting scheduled at this point. I actually have to do some work to code some land use data into the model, or at least verify some of the land use data in the model. And then we'll be able to start, I think, finalizing the processing of all that and moving that project further forward.
Do we need to appoint someone from this commission to that, or can Terry serve as?
I think Terry can continue to serve. I don't think there's any need to reappoint because she has been appointed already. And I think there's probably one, maybe two more steering committee or advisory committee meetings at the most.
Okay.
So I don't see the need for it unless you all want to do that.
No, she should finish it out.
And speaking of parking, have we heard from the Housing Commission about getting together?
I'm gonna cover that under other business.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Mayor.
I had.
Yeah, since our last planning meeting, the only thing that's happened is that strategy and priority session, which we already talked about. And we are halfway through our city manager candidate interviews. Should be wrapping that up later this month. And then the committee will make recommendations to the council at our August 2nd meeting. So hopefully the first meeting in September, we will be able to make a decision there.
Great.
But good candidate pool so far. Things are going well.
Good. Okay, how about other business? Eric, you said you had some.
Yeah, so two things. So right now we are tentatively looking at or trying to schedule a joint meeting with members of the Housing Commission, not the full commission, but several members of the Housing Commission and you all for our August meeting date. August 12th is that date. We're looking at using our Planning Commission meeting date for that. So I would imagine we may try to do that in person if possible. I think it'll make the discussion easier so that we're all around the table. And I think it's going to be, and we're also looking at bringing in some members of the affordable housing community, both policy and development side, to talk about kind of how parking impacts the creation of not only affordable housing, but I think also some of the family style, the larger units with more bedrooms. So like I said, we're trying to get that organized for the August 12th meeting, which would be our first meeting in August.
So not to put a wrench into it, but I will be out of town on August 12th.
That's okay. We've got Abby as our vice
I
chair.
know. I was going to say, Abby can step right in.
So
if you don't want to, Abby, you better start advocating for a different date.
Well, I heard we're co-hosting it, so I expect the chair of the Housing Commission to
Step
up. Yeah.
So we'll have, so I think we're still trying to figure out schedules on that. So that's at least the date that we're shooting for right now. The other thing I wanted to bring up is our next meeting right now is scheduled for July 22nd. So I know Amy's going to be out of town for that meeting. And I think, Mike, you're out of town as well, correct?
I might be as well.
So
Check my calendar.
yeah, so I know I don't want to necessarily lose momentum on our discussion of these changes, but at the same time, I think we may be tight on a quorum anyway. So, I know we had talked about looking at our meeting schedule over the summer, so that may be a good one that we just postpone if we want, or cancel if we want to do that. But at the same time, I don't want to have too big of a gap if we're then our first meeting in August potentially being a joint housing meeting, and then we're not revisiting this until the end of August. So I just wanted to put that out there for folks as well. We will have the remote option for that meeting on the 22nd. I don't like to ask people that are out of town to join a meeting. I think that's selfish of me, so I'm not going to do it, but you're all welcome to do as you choose. But just with people being out of town on the 22nd, I don't know if we'll have full quorum. Although with that said, because we're not making any I guess we might be making decisions at that meeting. I mean, we could still review the text without making any formal decisions, but we may get through everything to where we could start thinking about public hearings for this. So anyway.
So why don't we see between us and Tommy and Amy, who's available on the 22nd, see if we have a quorum.
Yeah, well, I know Amy's already said she's not.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I plan to have my computer with me, so if I have internet service, which I think we do, I'm happy to join, but I'll let Abby run the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here, so
I'll be a fly on the wall.
I have no idea what it means to chair yet, but yeah, sure, it'll be a good test run.
It's tough.
I'll-
Right,
I'll chat
Christine?
you promptings.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm around 22nd. I'll double check, but it should work for me.
If that, yeah, I think I'm gone the weekend of the 23rd, including, yeah. If I'm out, I'm not bringing my laptop. I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
The first time I've ever been to Maine, so it's very exciting.
That's
Oh,
where I'm going to be.
wow.
That's where I'm going to be. Where are you going, Joe?
Portland?
Oh, it will be in New York.
Okay.
It's all great. I love Maine.
You guys could run the meeting from Maine. That would be good.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
Okay. So I guess we've covered other business. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
yeah, I'm not sure how we, it sort of takes us back into what we were just covering, but I wanted to put it out as kind of a statement that we could think about. So we were talking, I think, Abby, and I think Abby brought this up last time. I don't remember exactly, but so the development, I call it the Hood House and the Manso, those two projects that have gone up there. And there's this sort of radical change between the scale of what the buildings are behind it, what the houses are behind it, and these new buildings. And we were kind of wrestling around the townhouse, small apartment, and sort of looking at what those differences are, and they're kind of small, right? And I wondered if we could just have a sort of overall, without going into specifically through the form itself, but are there other transition strips that are going to be affected by that larger construction going forward in like on Mallett's Bay that we might want to, I don't know if we can do this, but have detached cottage frontage, or can you do a hybrid of small apartment and detached? We don't have to discuss it now, but I just wondered if we might think about like instead of sort of tweaking a bigger change to that transition area. So I just wanted to have everyone think about that, if we could even do it. I don't even know. But
Sarah, are you talking about potentially changing the building form standards on some of these, in some of these locations? Or
maybe
okay.
um
Or potentially creating a new building form standard for some.
yeah, maybe just
Maybe
for those sort of transition spaces, because I think that the Manso and the Hoods project, it does feel out of scale with the sort of the buildings behind it, you know. And I mean, people could disagree, and I know that that's what we have put into law. It's okay, but I just wondered, is there any other areas we might want to scale it in a different way than just having a really large building all of a sudden up against a neighborhood that
Or digging into like the code for that and making sure it actually, the result of that code reflects more of what we're seeing in those pictures than what.
and that's what I think you brought up, Abby, that you couldn't really tell the difference between the townhouse, small apartment, and what's the other one?
The urban general.
Urban.
And that was part of what I was saying. I actually was seeing a lot of commentary and reading Burlington's design review board findings. There was a lot of discussion about scale in relation to other existing structures.
Yeah.
And transitions, which
So I just would like to see if we can find a little time if people feel similarly. So.
Well, I think some of that, Sarah, is what we're doing now with these amendments is, no code is going to be perfect for every situation, and no code is ever going to result in that idyllic form that everybody wants to see. That just kind of, there's never a one size fits all for any one code. So I think what you're seeing in some of these amendments that I'm proposing are in fact reaction to some of these developments that have come in, and I'm seeing how the developers are interpreting the code and what they're actually, what's showing up versus what's really kind of the hope or the intent was going to be. And those two things not really aligning. So,
right. And don't we have the power to change? I mean, we'd have to legally change it, but don't we sort of have the power to do that if we don't like how it's panning out?
well, yeah, which is what we're doing now, going through the amendment process and proposing new language to either provide more specificity on the standards or to change the standards altogether so that it's clear what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's where I've struggled with some of the code, is that there's not enough detail in there for me to definitively say it has to be this way versus this other way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, Mike, it's a little bit what you were getting at too at the very beginning of the meeting, which Abby missed, but just some sort of an overview feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, just to be clear, we can recommend these changes to the city council, who then has to approve them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
I'm going to throw one thing out for you to think about. I'm on this equity leadership committee of the Regional Planning Commission, and we're talking about we're starting to get into how zoning laws in the past have unintentionally or intentionally been prejudicial to certain groups, and just come up with some kind of language that espouses that our zoning is not intended to what's the right word? I can't even think of the words now. Eliminate the ability of or keep people from out of different areas. You know what I mean? We want to be all inclusive in our zoning. So I'll come up with something at some point, but just to give you some thought.
Well, it's funny because, when I was bringing up in the common ground, the back drive, common drive, and I was talking about, what about families that are living in those buildings and granny's out, shelling peas and the children are out in the back. And I know that in a lot of other places in the world, kids, well, you did, Mike, growing up, kids do play out in the back street.
We played in the front street.
Yeah. And
tackle football.
As weird as it sounds, that was a little bit in the back of my mind that I was thinking about is you may have communities where children don't have programs that are the ones that we grew up in, that,
Yep. Okay. Any other business?
So I just want to go back. Am I still taking a poll for the July 22nd meeting for folks?
Yes.
I know Joe is out, Abby is here, Sarah is here. Mike, you may be available. So potentially we could have that meeting. I'll talk to Tommy to see what her schedule is. I think if she's here, then that gives us potentially 4 for that meeting.
Okay.
So I'll confirm with her and then let you all know. I think is there a sense of if we only have 3 that we'll just cancel it, or do we still want to move forward if there's only 3 folks?
Well, let me ask you this. What about the following week? I know it's one more meeting, but because if we don't have the meeting, it's a month until the next one. And it's probably a month and a half before we get back to this topic.
Yeah, I know the week after that, I am out of town.
We don't need you anyway.
So, I mean, hey, I'm perfectly okay with it. Somebody's
well.
All right. Let's see if we can do it. Let's see if we can do it the 22nd and go from there.
okay. I'll reach out to Tommy.
Joe, I'll come up to Portland with my laptop and find you.
Oh, good Lord.
It's a small town.
Please don't.
It's a small town. Hey, Joe.
Well,
okay.
Sarah knows Winooskians have a way of finding one another.
I know. By Joe and I are
far afield. So.
All right. Seeing as it's after 8, oh, good Lord, it's 8:32. Anyone care to make a motion to adjourn?
The move.
I'll second that.
Joe seconds. All in favor?
I,
Oh, Joe? What
No,
did you
no, I
want?
was going to say, I actually have a question for Eric, but if anyone wants to stay on to hear it, they're welcome to.
Okay,
It seems somewhat vaguely related to planning.
okay.
but-
So we are adjourned and folks are welcome to leave. Thank you all. And we may or may not see you in a couple
Recording
weeks.
stopped.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. I'll let you know about the 20.